So this is the second game of the finals. We just saw Eldrad win with Anubis. And in this one, Kiva could be playing any of his three decks, and Eldrad has left this sort of typical Bast list that will get 3 more points every round, or a discard package list. And he opted to go for the Bast list. I guess he's thinking that's strongest into whatever Kiva's playing. And what Kiva ended up playing was a kind of hyper-thin discard Horus package. So it gets to thin down to whatever feels good in the matchup. Either it's attacking the hand, like we see here, or it's getting a lot of vision and tutoring and getting more card advantage. This is definitely a more complicated matchup than the Anubis list. Neither of these are the pre-made lists, but...
So at this point, Eldrad doesn't know what's in Kiva's hand.
He doesn't know what's in his hand? Yeah. But he does probably know what's in his deck.
I see.
Because only one of the lists that he brought to the tournament has Bone Knife, and these are open deck lists. So here we see him tutoring a bunch of night visions, and now we can consistently loop back and forth between night vision and fishing boat. He unfortunately didn't draw fruiting, which is really what you want to see on 3 mana. So the way that this sort of works is Eldrad's deck will get Nourish, and then he'll play it on the Bast, and the Bast will retain any of those buffs. So eventually he's going to want to play Nourish, play the Bast, and then play a tutor to get the Bast back to hand. And he's going to do that turn after turn and end up with 3 more points every single round. Mm-hmm. And in this patch, that's one of the best scaling decks. It does end up being weak to resets, which Kiva does have in his deck. And here they both have Vision 3, and they can see that they've both played a Night Vision.
So for the early rounds, before Eldrad can get these like repeated 3 points, what's the game plan? Just like wait out the draws?
I think his ideal draw would be something like Stars on 1 into Fruiting on 2 into Bast and get that going as quickly as possible. And in the early rounds, he might be playing it across a couple rounds, where like one round he has no points, but he's playing Fruiting, or he's playing like Night Vision Fruiting, and then the next round he's playing Bast for the points. And depending on how he thinks his opponent will play, he might opt into just playing like Fruiting on Fruiting and not try to boost up the Bast as much if he just wants a little bit of points. Because there aren't many cards in Kiva's list that are worth points. He has B, Bounty, and then Horus, I guess. And that's just 3 cards out of 15. Oh, I guess he has Pelican too. So there, Pelican got rid of a Night Vision. And definitely had more points than the 5-point Bast.
So in this matchup, would you say that there's one player's deck that's noticeably stronger in the early game versus the later rounds?
They're both pretty weak in the early game. They both don't play very many cards worth points. It's not really their game plan. And so it boils down to what happens in the late game. I think Kiva keeping Vision so that he can reset the Bast is really important. So here we see Fishing Boat, and he's probably going to play something else so that his hand isn't too full. Or maybe he just wants a lot of vision, but unclear. Bast is also a pretty telegraphed deck, so even though Kiva doesn't have vision at this point, he probably knows what his opponent wants to be doing. I'm a little bit surprised to see this, actually. So this means that he won't have Nourish for next round, although I guess he could play it next round. And Fishing Boat's one of the best ways to fight against Bone Knives, because card for card it's getting you a big advantage.
So in this hand we see 3 fruitings. Does this change the strategy for the round at all?
Not really. I think left in his deck, and he can see what's in his deck, he has 1 more night vision, so that's perfect. You wanna have like a 1-to-1 ratio of night vision and fruiting ideally. I think it's pretty clear what Eldrad's gonna do for the next couple rounds, but I guess if he's really trying to fight against Bone Knives, you can play redundant copies of Night Vision to make sure that you're not getting rid of your Bast when you don't want to be. And we see that he doesn't really have that option here. Everything costs so much mana. There is a line where I guess if he expects his opponent to play no points, he could play like fruiting. Because Bast being huge doesn't really matter that much. I think eventually Bast wants to get more than 7 points because Horus is 7 points, but other than that, it's really kind of just a binary of did my opponent play points at all versus did they play no points.
Yeah, I guess this match has been a really huge contrast to the previous one where there's just no points at all here.
Yeah. It also really heats up after the shuffle, which is a difference. So you see Anubis really just going hard all the time, and then after the shuffle you have to do some like bluffing or slow down a little bit. But here it's really just set up for the first several rounds. And that really gives Kiva the flexibility to be using Pelican on the cards that he wants to get rid of. And we'll see if he's done that correctly. So with 2 night visions, Kiva can see everything that's on the stack here. And we do see Horus come out to tie the round. And it's good to get that into the discard before the shuffle because you want to get those points again. There's also the consideration, so if you're always playing Fruiting Bast Night Vision, you've played 3 cards. And if the opponent has enough sight, those 3 cards are enough to get them a free Horus. Maybe that's what Kiva's going for with his Pelican removals. There's also the Last Stars, which was in the last 2 cards of the deck. Not exactly what you want to see.
So what's the motivation here for passing in the very first round?
For dry passing? So Kiva still has Imprison, and he wants his opponent to play cards so that he will get to play it as late as possible. And Eldrad presumably knows that, and that's one way to use stars, is just as a delay on your points, because it is free. I think he'd prefer not to play it before the shuffle though, because you don't really want to draw it. It's not good after the first couple rounds of the game. Another consideration is that this is his last night vision, and he might want to use that first in order to get back the fishing boat, because that keeps that cycle going. Whereas if he plays Bast first, then Bast will be found by the night vision, and over the next couple rounds he might not see a night vision to get the combo going again. So from Kiva's perspective, Eldrad could have just played Bast. And if he's played Bast, then Kiva would need to play either Imprison or Bone Knife and then Imprison, because Eldrad would be able to pass and have more points. Right. We also see all this time into the game, and it's still just one win for Kiva. Okay. So if his opponents played Night Vision, Kiva will know both of the cards that have been played and can do some discarding and then play Imprison here. But we see that the first one wasn't Night Vision, it was just Bone Knife.
So at this point, Kiva doesn't know that there's a lot of points on the board.
He can sort of guess. There aren't too many things that the deck can do, and it's down to 0 cards in deck, so it's sort of like he has total knowledge of what's in Eldrad's hand at this point. It's just a matter of how he decided to play it out. So we do see Imprison come out. And I think Kiva correctly calculated that it would be 2 points with the tutor. And in this case, both players end up with Nourish, because Bounty was the last card played, but sometimes you play Bounty and you get 5 points out of it and your opponent ends up with 2 Nourish, or your opponent plays a card right after and you have 2 Nourish but they don't. It's pretty flexible in that way and benefits from the vision that the deck runs.
So are there any changes in strategy as a result of the shuffle?
Yeah, I think Kiva could probably tell that Eldrad doesn't necessarily have fishing boat night vision. And I guess Eldrad can see that Kiva now has some night visions in hand, and so Kiva can see the stars, and that means I guess that Bone Knife becomes extra good, so Kiva doesn't want to play Pelican as much. Here we see Eldrad delayed playing Bast as long as possible. probably playing around a reset, which I think the chances were like 1 in 9 to draw, or 2 in 9.
So it seems like a lot of this is being able to finesse a way to not get imprisoned played after your points.
Yeah, that's big. And as the game goes on, Pelican keeps taking more and more of the deck away. And you'll see Imprison more and more frequently as a result. So Eldrad does need to get the wins in before that becomes the case. And they both have vision, so they can like play vision, see if their opponent has vision, and then there's a complicated dynamic going on there too. So seeing that this is Bone Knife, he could either play out all of his hand and then Bone Knife wouldn't do anything, or he could just kind of concede the round or wait for his opponent to do something. Here he's going to end up with Bast as the only card in his hand, unless something else happens. Or I guess actually Fishing Boat. Fishing Boat is in deck, and that has priority.
So what's Kiva thinking here?
Well, he's operating with presumably no vision, but he knows his opponent doesn't have Bast, and Bast is the only card that on its own gets points. So he must know that Eldrad has no points. So any points that Kiva plays, and he probably would have played points if he had points here, would have taken the round. But he's making sure to just Bone Knife anything that's coming. I didn't see if he guessed that his opponent had played a night vision, or if he had vision of it, but making sure to knock the card that it tutors out as well was important there. Yeah, he did have vision actually. And you saw that his night vision got back Fishing Boat there. So if Eldrad wants, he can play 3 points because of the Nourish. He could probably also count and see how many Bone Knives are left to see if that makes sense. But I think 3 points probably doesn't take anything here, so maybe he just dry passes. This is the rough position that Kiva's put him in though, because by keeping the Bone Knives and being able to aggressively get rid of Fishing Boat before he's able to play it, that sort of breaks up the loop in a way. And he's also able to know when the combo has been played and adjust to that. Against a different deck, especially like an aggressive deck that runs pretty thin, you might see the Bone Knives get eaten by the Pelican much earlier, or he might be like forced to just eat whatever, even if it means card disadvantage. This is definitely going slow. I think the match goes very slow for a while, and then it will thin down to a point where They're both either resetting or getting huge amounts of points every round. We see him really deliberating on trying to just play 3 points, but he's got to know that Bounty and Horus and Pelican are all draw options. And maybe he just thinks that Pelican would be too much of a card disadvantage for Kiva to play. So if Kiva's played points, if he started with points here, he can just pass and take it. But presumably he didn't, and now he's decided to play some.
So is it the case that there is like going to be a point at which Kiva's deck is thinned down sufficiently that he'll just win every round, and that Eldrad has to basically win before this point?
That's not exactly the case. So Eldrad has as much of a card advantage engine as Kiva, and as much of a vision engine as Kiva. So they can both just trade card for card. Eldrad is waiting until Kiva plays in prison, and Kiva is trying to delay that as much as possible. And they will both be operating with a lot of information because of night visions. So I think in a lot of matchups, both Bast and Hyperthin end up just never losing after a certain point. But against each other, there's a more complicated interaction. Kiva might also be pitching cards because he has too many in hand. And some number of those are going to be tutoring. Yeah. So Fishing Boat here only got one night vision, I think, the last night vision. And then he got his Fishing Boat back. And then Bounty was what took it. And Eldrad also knows that Kiva has Horus in hand at this point. So he could just lead it to Horus, knowing that Bast is still in the discard pile.
In which case, it would make sense for Eldrad to forfeit this round, essentially.
Yeah, either passing or playing night vision are good options, because he does need to have Bast next round. If he loses that round, then it's over. I think if he really wanted to, maybe he could just pass here. You could use the 2 Nourish to try to win a round. Use the 2 Nourish, force out an Imprison, and then use double fruiting to get 3 more points, maybe? But that would be pretty tricky. So here we see that Kiva didn't lead with points. Presumably he wanted to keep Horus, because it's one of only 3 cards that give him points. And the other of those, Pelican, he would prefer not to play with some hands. It's 2-2. Kiva could play Horus here. And then Eldrad has to think, do I play Fruiting, trying to save mana? Or is it better to keep it because mana doesn't matter anymore, and he wants to play around like Bone Knife. He opted to play it. We do see Horus come out. I'm not sure I would have played it there though. I think that was probably wrong. At this point you just have so much mana and such cheap cards in your deck.
You're talking about Eldrad with the fruiting.
Yeah. So if he had held on to it, he would have kept his opponent guessing, and it would have provided like more cards on the left side of his hand to prevent his valuable 2-drops from being discarded. So here we see there are 5 Bone Knives in the deck. And still no Bast, so he needs to win this round without Bast. He has 9 points maximum with the 3 Nourish and then 2 more Fruitings. And he's also guaranteed to not get Bast next round, just because of how he drew, which I think was pretty unlucky on his part.
So are there any realistic scenarios where Eldrad gets through this round and also next round?
There are, so I guess Fishing Boat is going to draw the 2 cards in his deck, and then he has a chance of drawing Bast naturally after the shuffle. But aside from him doing that, it would be pretty hard. So here he has to dodge Imprison, hope that his opponent doesn't have Horus, and commit a bunch of fruiting resources, I think. And he does have so most of this time this deck needs Bast to have any points, any shot at winning. But he does have 9 points, which is pretty high for this deck. The more cards he plays, the lower his chance of drawing Bast naturally though. So he's got to be considering that also. I think there's probably like 2 or 3 0-1 costs in Kiva's hand that Eldrad knows about. So Pelican would be like 6 or 7 points. If he guesses that it's 6 and he's right, then he wants to just have, I guess, Stars played here. Or no, I think if he guesses that it's 6 points and he's right, he wants to play Fruiting here and then pass. But, I mean, if he's wrong, he loses. Presumably his opponent also has vision at this point. Okay, so we got it. And if Kiva had just kept the Bone Knife instead of playing it, he would have won. Again, we see a hand with no Bast. So Pelican is now in the discard. Fishing Boat is in his hand. He has 2 draws from 6 cards to see 2 cards. I guess he would tie with Bounty. So it's just Horus that would beat most things.
And the chances for having a Horus in the hand right now are quite low.
Yeah, I think it's 1 in 3. If we're assuming that he didn't have it last round because he didn't play it, because that probably would have been the better play. Then it's just the 2 draws he just made out of 6 cards. And we see Kiva not opting to thin down that much. So he's really valuing the bone knives instead of aggressively trying to get down to a thin deck of Imprison Horus.
And what's the rationale for that?
I mean, I would assume that's a mistake, but I guess he's really valuing the discard offered. So he's thinking that if he keeps enough discard, he gets to this critical mass where he can always be answering night vision tutoring up fishing boat. And that like mitigates the cycling effect of the Bast deck. But we did see the Bast deck stumble a little bit, and it wasn't really because of discard. So it feels like if Kiva's deck was pretty thin at this point, he could just close out the game. So he leads night vision, he can't lead dry pass, because then Kiva would take it and draw up to 6 cards. I think Kiva also has a night vision, so they can get symmetric information here. And then Eldrad is forced to play the 3rd card, which is the last of the scene cards. Pretty sure that's a possibility here. It should be the obvious choice. I guess unless he thinks that he can play Horus and force out a Bast without a tutor for the Bast. He's definitely thinking it through. Bone knife. Well, here Eldrad could just pass. I guess he doesn't really want to pass. It ends up being 1 stuffed draw for him. Right, he is at 5, and then he tries to draw 2, and he only draws 1. And Kiva gets 2 natural draws. But it would mean that he would have fishing boat. Presumably once he has that, it makes a lot of Kiva's cards pretty bad. But we don't see the pass, we see fruiting. and now there's no more vision.
So is the assumption that this card was Horus?
It depends if Kiva is going for an imprison play or for a Horus play. So he might have neither of those cards. Those might be the last cards in his deck. But Eldrad, seeing Bone Knife as an opener here, probably assumes that Kiva has imprison. And so the second card that Kiva played is probably either Vision or Bone Knife.
So in that case, why does Eldrad choose to play the points now?
And we do see Horus. I'm not exactly sure. So maybe he thinks that... So Kiva could assume that Eldrad has played Vision at some point, which means Eldrad can see that he's played discard, and Eldrad might think, I want to delay playing my Bast as long as possible. But then he's like switching it and playing it as soon as possible, and might have like a free pass and get card advantage that way. But in general, I agree. I think that this was sort of a weird line from both players. So now Kiva must have Imprison. I think that's why he's dry passing. Eldrad knows all of the cards in Kiva's hand just because it's the end of the deck. This is like the least ambiguous time.
So it's clear that Imprison's gonna come out.
Probably. Kiva doesn't have to spend it, but he really wants to because he wants it to get shuffled.
And a win here for Kiva is the entire match.
Yeah. This would be one win each for both of them. Then Kiva's remaining decks are Anubis and a Hyperthin robot version, which would probably lose this matchup and would probably lose the other matchup too. And Eldrad's last list is a more standard discard package.
So what's Eldrad's thought process here?
Well, he could dry pass. That gives him like essentially more chaos in when he decides to play his points. And then maybe he doesn't get imprisoned. But in general, having more cards in hand against like Bone Knife and Imprison isn't so good. So he's probably considering the dry pass or not. I can't tell if there's a bone knife left, but Eldrad would know that. And maybe he doesn't want to dry pass and then get bone knifed, because then he'd be committed to playing. I think Bounty is also the last card worth points that Kiva has, so that's in his hand. Yeah. But he's deciding not to dry pass, which I think makes sense. And maybe he's just going to get the 3 points and then try to also use the Bounty Nourish. Because at this point he definitely doesn't need to grow the Bast, so playing the stars first makes more sense. And if he plays Fishing Boat late, he also gets around Bone Knife.
And I guess there's no vision anymore for either player.
I would think so. Yeah, I think that both Night Visions are in Kiva's discard pile. Okay, so maybe Imprison is one of those cards. I think that pattern of 2 cards in a row sort of implies a reset might be played. Because you play a reset and then you play something worth points.
So here, Kiva has only 1 card in their deck, or in their hand currently.
Mm-hmm.
So the thought process is whether to pass or play the card.
Yeah, and it's probably something, I guess it's Bounty, right? But he played Imprison before Night Vision because he wanted to get back the Imprison. But once he played Night Vision, he saw that Imprison had missed the Bast and that he probably wasn't going to win that round. So he was thinking, did Eldrad try to just play 3 points? Or did he play 13 points? And 13 points seemed a lot more likely. And now presumably Kiva always wins this round. There's no Bast. Kiva has Bounty and Prison, which he wants to save, but I think playing Bounty is enough to take the round if he does it right.
And Kiva knows at this point that there's no Bast.
Yeah, he can see it in the discard pile. I think he also knows there's no Fishing Boat. But Eldrad could get back both of those cards this round. So he's Pelican. So Imprison Bounty. Pelican's probably hitting nothing. So he could make some assumption about what the last card is, maybe? Like he would have played Bounty instead. But Eldrad does want to play a second Night Vision because he wants the Fishing Boat back here. Oh, he just passed. Wow. I guess he doesn't need to do it yet. Felt pretty weird. So this dry pass makes sense. Eldrad has one stuff draw. And he's encouraging Eldrad to play into Imprison. And you see how cheap this deck is too. Like you can play all the cards in your hand without getting any Inspire. Inspire sort of just is a target for Bone Knife at this point. So this again was kind of a free pass, right? It's the same situation except Night Vision got traded out for Fishing Boat.
So if Kiva plays Imprison at this point, this wins him the round, effectively.
I think if Kiva plays Imprison into Horus, because Imprison gives Eldrad 5 points here.
I see.
I think it would just be Horus. But if he has a bunch of Bone Knives, he could do that first and then maybe win with Bounty. Especially if he used Bounty for 5 points. Okay, so Eldrad can pass and win this round. But he might want to... Like, if he does that, then he won't have Bast next round. So he plays another Night Vision to get back Bast. And now Kiva can see everything that Eldrad has played. And he has the Imprison. So... He also has sight of 3 cards. Okay, now he has 3 points, and Eldrad needs to play some Nourishes here. If Kiva has Horus, then he wins all the time here. Oh, no. I don't know why Eldrad didn't play Nourish there.
So without playing Nourish, they tie.
Yeah, I guess you're right. They don't tie because the 2 tutors happen before the Imprison. So it'd be 5 points for Eldrad and 3 points for Kiva.
I see.
But so now Kiva definitely has at least 5 points here. Which means that... Well, I guess Eldrad has 5 points too. So if the last card is not points, Eldrad ties here. But maybe he wants a win instead. You see the calculator come out? Alright, let's go. 10. I don't know what the 10 means. Oh, no, it's over. Yeah, there's Horus. It was close.
Yeah, that was intense.
We see a lot of different matchups with these different decks. So that one is wrapped up for Kiva, and it's 1-1.